This is Troy Black. You're watching Filibusted, and I believe you're going to hear something in this video you're not going to get anywhere else because I recently received what you might call an insider tip from a trusted source about a top secret U.S. government program currently happening in the Arctic Circle. And yes, I'm going to be sharing a few details, what I'm allowed to share about that later in this video. But first, I need to give a little backstory here, a little bit of a setup so you understand why does this program matter. So let's look at the history of this region. So this day in history, this is history.com, they're talking about a historic Arctic mission that changed the world. And this is the transit of the North Pole by the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. And this happened on August 3rd, 1958. So how did this mission change the world? Well, essentially, it revolutionized naval warfare and geopolitics, and it was kind of a turning point in the Cold War. The Nautilus dived at Alaska, traveled 1,800 miles under the Arctic ice cap, and then eventually landed in Iceland. And what it did was it created a shorter route from the Pacific to the Atlantic and to Europe. This first nuclear-powered submarine in the U.S. was constructed under the supervision of Hyman G. Rickover, a Russian-born engineer. So this is him right here. And he was the admiral aboard the Nautilus, but he joined the U.S. atomic program in 1946. And this mission by the Nautilus proved that submarines could operate hidden under the ice for weeks, completely undetected. So how did this revolutionize the Cold War? Well, suddenly nuclear-powered submarines could travel from the Pacific to the Atlantic without ever surfacing, essentially bypassing Soviet defenses. And this made these submarines essentially invulnerable second strike weapons. So somebody wants to shoot a nuke, right? And this is a modern day updated version of nuclear deterrence, essentially. But somebody wants to shoot a nuke. Well, they know that we've got an automatic system set up to fire nukes back, and that's the deterrence. Like, don't shoot at us or else it's going to happen to you no matter what, and you're not going to be able to find the sub it's coming from. Why? Because it's hiding under the ice. It's undetected, right? And so it was suddenly the backbone of nuclear deterrence, and it's been the backbone ever since. And there's other things we have now, like this article here is talking about AI and how that's involved. But what did this do? Well, it triggered a nuclear submarine arms race. It's kind of like a gold rush, for the Arctic Circle. And so right after this, the Soviets responded rapidly with their own nuclear sub, and they ended up reaching the North Pole in 1962. So here's a picture of their K3 Leninsky Komsomol, if I'm saying that correctly. And this is obviously in the museum today. But both sides began these routine under ice operations, the U.S. and Soviet Russia. And the Arctic still remains today an important hidden battleground for the U.S., for Russia, but now also increasingly for China as well, and Chinese submarines. So what's happened recently? Well, let's look at this. We have a recent NATO warning, and this is a post on X. And this is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, but he's also the NATO Secretary General, and his name is Mark Rutte. And he warned about Russia expanding their Northern Fleet submarine bases. So this is a warning, and he said, hey, we got to pay attention to this as NATO, right? Now, I could get into all the politics involved with NATO and the U.S. I'm not going to do that today. He describes how Russia's submarine bases currently house two different types of nuclear-armed vessels, and how they pose a direct threat to the U.S. as well as Europe, specifically mentioning Norway. And in response to this warning that he issues, and it's funny because he kind of it was kind of a joke when he was saying it, but it also ended up being a warning, and people took it seriously. In response to this, you have several nations responding, but here's an article having to do with Great Britain's response, and this is from November 7th, 2025. Is the Russian Navy a threat to Britain? And Benedict Baxendale Smith argued in this, they mentioned his argument in this article that Russia's continued investment of more than 77 billion pounds in naval modernization shows clear intent from Russia. So they're saying this is no light thing. We should not take this lightly. The reason this warning from and to NATO and NATO countries matters is because it echoes the Nautilus era Arctic arms race. Investing can be confusing and scary, but it doesn't have to be. Genesis Gold Group takes the guessing out of the game and guides you on your gold investment journey. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections, kind of like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer high security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there, 100% owned by you. So don't wait to get started. Visit filibustedgold.com today for a free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group. So what we're seeing is the same way that it ramped up then, it's ramping up now. And here's an article from March 2025, earlier this year. Russia expands its Arctic fleet with nuclear submarines that will be launched within the next 2 years. And it talks about how the world is still seeking to develop the Arctic peacefully in a lot of ways. Some of the reasons being it holds 22% of the global oil and gas reserves. It's also the location of the Northern Sea Route, which nearly halves the shipping time from Asia ports to Europe in half. And so there's a lot of reasons to peacefully pursue maintaining control of the Arctic, right? Or at least maintaining presence. But Russia is currently building military bases there and expanding its fleet. And so they're obviously showing signs of ulterior motives, right? And the other thing is they're expanding their Arctic fleet after decades of calm when it comes to this region. So it's like, well, there's got to be a reason why they're suddenly pumping money and effort into this location. It's also recently been leaked that China and Russia crews are training together in Russian academies for Arctic ops. So Russia's expanding its Arctic fleet, right? Well, what makes it even worse is another thing that's recently been leaked is that Russia's new Arctic submarine shield is ready to go. What is that? Let's look at this. Project Harmony, Russia's Arctic submarine shield, how Western tech fueled the secret network. This article just came out October 25th of 2025. So a couple months ago. And they describe this project Harmony. It's codenamed Harmony, but it's a vast network of sensors, drones, and it stretches across the seabed, invisibly protecting Russia's nuclear submarines. Behind this is a bunch of Western technology mixed with sanctions that Russia kept bending and bending and bending until they are essentially broken. And apparently, Moscow actually used a front company based in Cyprus. I'm going to pull this up. This is Mostrello or Mostrello, however you say it, Commercial Ltd. The worst little website you've ever seen in your life. It's like a little HTML like page. It's so bad. But it's supposedly this little front company that they're using to secretly purchase sonar systems, underwater drones, and fiber optic cables for this project. But we're letting them do it. That's the problem. And this project is enhancing Russia's ability to get its nuclear-armed submarines in and out of port without being detected. So they know what they're doing. They're setting up for something. But what is the U.S. doing about it? There's the question. Okay, well, we know that the modern U.S. Arctic strategy is changing. We've talked about it before on this channel. The U.S. has developed its first official Arctic warfare manual in over 50 years. So I learned about this on watching this video here, why the U.S. is preparing for an Arctic war. This is from the Task and Purpose YouTube channel. So if you want to go watch that full video, it's about 15 minutes long, worth the watch. So one of the things he mentions in this video is when the U.S. started to get it in gear again when it comes to their Arctic strategy. So this came out under the Biden administration in 2022, the National Strategy for the Arctic Region. And then in 2024, the Department of Defense announced its publication of 2024 Arctic Strategy. And this is part of the DoD's effort to implement the 2022 strategy to actually start doing the things that they said they were going to do, right? And one of the things that they mention here is that the Arctic region is undergoing rapid change. And they mentioned some of the things I've already mentioned, like China seeking increased access and influence in the Arctic. Russia remains a threat in the region despite some of its losses in Ukraine. And these two competitors are collaborating in the Arctic. That's an issue. They also talk about how Finland and Sweden's historic decision to join NATO a few years back also presents new opportunities for collaboration and cooperation from the other side. So there's a lot of different things that the U.S. has to work through when it comes to what's happening in the Arctic and who has control over these regions. But all of this is underscored by the impact of climate change in the Arctic. So if y'all have seen this channel, I'm not buying all the global warming hoax type stuff. But I do see evidence that the climate goes in cycles and it does change. It does go up and down. one of the things that is technically happening right now is that the Arctic is warming at least 3 times faster than other places in the world. And what does that mean? Well, it means there's less ice in places there used to be more ice, right? And at some point in history, in the future, we'll probably see more ice come back, because that's seems to be the way it works, cycles. But I'm not a climate change expert or whatever, but neither are the climate change experts. So that's beside the point. But one example is that some of the sea lanes are opening up. A lot of the ice that's made it difficult, apparently, to get through some of the areas in this region, it's not so difficult to get through now, and some of the Arctic routes are opening up, right? And that potentially allows for stealthy strikes of North America. Here's another article. As the Arctic heats up, the U.S. Coast Guard's icebreaker fleet is preparing for boom times. So we're just looking at, and this is literally from November of this year, we're looking at more of the changes that are taking place, and some of the things that the government is trying to do and some of the companies they're trying to work with. But what is their 3-step plan? Well, it's pretty simple. Here's the hard part. According to the Department of Defense or the Department of War, number 1, the DoD will work on awareness, communications, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Great. That's what you should be doing anyways, right? Number 2, the DoD will better engage with allies and partners. Great. That's what you should be doing anyways, right? Number 3, the DoD will stay present in the Arctic by regularly training in the region. Awesome. Captain Obvious answer right there. But those are their 3 strategies they've talked about. Well, we can get a few more clues about what the United States government is actually doing based on some of the things we've seen them do last year. One of the statements they've made about what they're doing next year. And then also, I've got a tip from a trusted source that I want to share in a second as well, that I think sheds a little bit more light on the situation. So this is something that just took place this year. U.S. nuclear submarine makes historic Iceland visit as Arctic security and allied patrols expand. So this was July 9th, 2025. A U.S. nuclear-powered Navy submarine makes a historic port call in Iceland. This is the first time this kind of U.S. vessel has docked on Icelandic shores. And going all the way back to 1958, the Nautilus, where did it end up? Well, it wound up in Iceland. So it's kind of like we're seeing history repeat itself, right? In a sense, like same Arctic arms race, same thing happening, right? So maybe they were doing that on purpose. Maybe they were calling back to that win, over the Soviet Union back then in the Cold War. I don't know. But one of the things that this article does talk about is that this was a symbolic gesture. They're kind of saying, hey, no, we've got control of the GIUK gap. So it was a little bit of just a saving face moment, right? Well, how did Russia respond? Now, I don't know if this is technically related or not, but the timing seems pretty coincidental. This was July 9th, 2025. Just 1 month later, Russia expands nuclear submarine fleet to counter NATO in Arctic and Pacific theaters. We made a symbolic gesture and Russia expands their fleet, right? Phenomenal. We should be doing more than just making gestures at this point. But this was published by the Moscow Times on July 25th. So that was less than a month later. And so what are the U.S.'s plans for 2026? Well, let's look at this. Navy to conduct Arctic submarine training in February of 2026. So the U.S. Navy announced the ICE X-26. This is going to take place between February and April of this next year. It is an exercise north of Alaska testing under ice ops with unmanned vehicles, torpedoes, and a temporary ice camp. So some of the things that Russia is already doing in the Arctic Circle. But why are they doing this? Well, one of the reasons that they mention here specifically is because they're saying China has access to Russian bases and ports in the Arctic. They say the time it would take for them to launch strikes against North America targets could be extremely short compared to what it used to be because they have access to these Russian bases. Sounds like a pretty big deal to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not. But here's what we know is that the government has what they've released to the public, right? And then they have their own set of information, their own set of plans, their own set of procedures, things that they're doing. And so I received this week what you might call a tip-off from a, quote unquote insider. And this is a trusted source. I'm not allowed to identify the source, who it is, but this goes beyond what they're currently sharing publicly. And I feel okay sharing this because I was told that these things are going to start being leaked purposefully within a few months to a couple years from now. And I believe that could, I don't know the reason for that, but it could be that that's part of an intimidation tactics, essentially. It could be the reason for it. I'm not sure. This is what I was told, that the United States is currently working on a project that they label as the Arctic weapon. Interesting. So it sounds like it goes beyond just this three-step plan that we outlined earlier. A plan labeled the Arctic weapon. And some of the details I got was it's a project meant to derail the Russian subs in that region. It's going to act like a wall of defense or a counterattack in the case of measures taken against the U.S. by Russia. And this is something they've been planning apparently for a long time, but they haven't been able to set it in motion until now. I was also told that this is a very expensive and risky project. Now, I'm not sure where the risk comes in beyond what we're already doing, but apparently there's a lot of risk involved for various reasons and a lot of expense as well. I would say keep your eyes open and watch and see when some of these things start coming to light, because if this source is correct about this, then we're going to see some of this stuff leaked within the next few months to the next couple of years, whenever that timeline comes to play. Very interesting stuff. I'm curious to know what the Arctic weapon is all about, what the U.S. is really doing. I'm hoping that NATO, or at least, some of the other countries that actually care about future survival of the human race, step up their game and actually begin to do more about what Russia and China are doing and even planning in the Arctic Circle. I know that President Trump doesn't overlook stuff like this, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years and the next decade when it comes to the Arctic Circle. So that's it. That's the episode for today, and I hope to see you next time.
Gold is not just a backup plan if the world falls apart. It's an investment opportunity that could set you up for generations. There's never really a bad time to invest in gold, but you want to make sure you have the right guide, and that is where Genesis Gold Group shines. Whether you are a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, their trusted expertise and competitive pricing makes them an easy choice. They offer tangible assets in case of emergencies, but they can also design the perfect IRA just for you. And they'll even cut through all that confusing red tape from the IRS. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer a more high-security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there and 100% owned by you. Genesis Gold Group is a safe, simple, and convenient way to invest. Visit filibustedgold.com today for your free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.